Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I'm your host, J, your resident troublemaker, your resident culture warrior. I hope you're all doing well on this Tuesday as we claw our way through this week and closer to the weekend. All right, folks, let's get right into it. You knew that there was going to be one today. And when I say you knew there was going to be one, I'm talking about those types of articles that just sort of make you sit there and go, what the actual. Right, well, I think I can drop an F-bomb yet, right? It's been, we're coming up on the first minute of the video. But anyway, there's always one. There's always one article that makes you sit there and go, what the actual fuck, right? And I think this is that article. So let's get right into it. This is also coming to us from the good folks over at starterfacts.com, and it says the Rings of Power's traditionalist approach failed to live up to the progressiveness of Tolkien. Okay, so a person who is traditionally Catholic and a professor of a professor of linguistics, apparently was a super progressive. So let's find out. In modern series, it is often the case that showrunners try their hardest to promote more progressive standards than what has been seen in the past. Well, at least they're admitting it. They're saying the quiet part out loud. That's a first. You would therefore think that such a mass-marketed show as Amazon's Rings of Pewter would have worked hard to update outdated conventions. In other words, you would think that they would completely change the story. Instead, Rings of Power utterly failed to modernize the material and removed the most progressive quality of Tolkien's works altogether. So, pulling black elves out of thin air, not good enough. Pulling black dwarves out of thin air, not good enough. Completely disregarding that Tolkien describes female dwarves as looking the exact same as male dwarves, okay? But, we're not going to do that because we need to highlight the femininity of this actress. Not good enough. Although conversations around sexuality, trans rights, movements, and gender politics are commonplace today, when Tolkien wrote his books, such concepts were far from casual. Therefore, the regular inclusion of androgynous races within his stories, which included many of the featured characters of the books, was incredibly progressive. Wrong. Because they're not androgynous in the way that you're talking about it, okay? They're not androgynous in the sense of like a Ziggy Stardust, right? Or a RuPaul, okay? It's much more nuanced than that, but let's go through the article first. For instance, Tolkien described the elves as all beautiful in face and body. However, he also noted that there is little physical difference between male and female elves. Wrong misinterpretation right there. What he says is that they are both physically active, like they're very active, they're very fit. Okay, he doesn't say that there's little difference between the men and the women, but what he says is there's little difference in their physicality. In other words, in how fit they are, right? How slender and lean and muscular they are. Not in that the men look like women and the women look like men. Okay, so that's wrong. That's wrong. The image of elvish people are meant to be universally slender and elegant with more naturally feminine features. No, he does not say that. The slender part, yes, maybe the elegant part, definitely he has in there, but naturally feminine features, no. He does not say that the male elves look like women at all. At least not in the ones that I read that are on my bookshelf. Okay, he does not mention that at all. Moreover, Tolkien's commentary on their race indicated few cultural differences between the genders. Women are generally just as powerful as men and often just as tall and robust. Okay, stop. He does not say that they are just as powerful as men. What he says is, as far as tall and robust, Not really. And the reason why I say that is because he singles out Galadriel, okay, as being taller than most, definitely taller than most elven women, right? And she was said to be a little over 6 feet tall, okay? Whereas the average male elf is over 6 feet tall, okay? So to say that they're just as tall and robust, no, I think Tolkien was trying to imply that if you took, 100 fit, physically healthy, in shape people, in the real world, like 100 men and 100 women, and so you would find that generally their heights fall within a certain thing. On the men, on average, it would be anywhere from a low end of about 5'9", 5'10", to a high end of about 6'3", 6'4", and most of the men, not all, but most of them would fit within that space range. And with the women, it would be whatever it is for the women, right? Whether it be like 5'4" to say maybe 6'1", most of the women would fall within that range. Okay, so when he says as far as like tall and robust, that's what he's referencing. Now, when he says just as powerful, no, it's not like Galadriel can go throw a left hook that's going to be just as powerful as, say, if Elrond threw a left hook or if Gilgalad threw a left hook. That's not what he's talking about. In Galadriel's case, she might be able to do that, okay? But she was the exception. Even her nickname was Man Maiden, okay? That lets you know that there were differences, okay? If you read Tolkien, you would know this, okay? In terms of, if you mean power in the sort of non-physical sense, meaning having influence and sway, then yes, the elven culture allowed for both men and women to sort of rise up and be equally as powerful in that regard. As far as cultural differences goes, he does specify that it's not like women had defined roles, like you do the cooking, I'll do the building and stuff like that. It was sort of like anybody could do it. And even he does mention that elven males do get some pleasure in cooking. So there you go. There's that, if you really want to dig deep. Anyway, dwarves, of course, are described as much the opposite to the elves, yet remain just as androgynous. No. Leaning to more traditionally masculine qualities, all dwarves were known for their incredible strength, endurance, and resilience. Dwarven women, who only made up a third of their race, also featured these same traits, proudly growing great beards, and are just as committed to the efforts of smithing and mining as men. Okay, that's true. But despite Tolkien's forward-thinking ideologies in his books, Rings of Pewter decided to stick to a more traditional approach to representing its characters, even if the source material says otherwise. Unlike how elves are described in the books, the dissimilarities in the show between men and women are quite evident. For example, the few elvish women that appear all have long, blonde, flowing hair and are frequently dressed in traditionally feminine clothing. Opposingly, the elvish men mostly have much shorter hair, a notable difference from Peter Jackson's interpretation in his films. It's also a noticeable difference in how Tolkien describes them. The men in that show having short hair makes absolutely no fucking sense whatsoever. Okay. Fans have also noted Galadriel's short stature, played by Morfydd Clark. Although an actor's height is not usually an issue when portraying a fantasy character, it contradicts the book's description of Galadriel as a tall, powerful, and imposing female elf. No, it doesn't describe her as tall, powerful, and imposing. It describes her as almost Amazon-like. Okay? Now, you can interpret that as tall, powerful, imposing, but that's not what Tolkien was going for. Okay. Similarly, Durin's dwarvish wife, Disa, is much loved by fans. I don't know who you're talking to. However, her lack of facial hair is a noticeable difference from the source material. That is true. Plus, the inclusion of sideburns hidden mostly by her hairstyle seems more of a farce than a genuine attempt to be true to Tolkien's vision. That entire show is a farce, okay? Rings of Pewter could have used the androgynous themes displayed in Tolkien's books to great advantage. And there it is. Use Tolkien for your agenda. both in correcting the precedents set by Peter Jackson's non-diverse cast, staying true to the books, and introducing the series to a much wider audience. Let's look at that again. Both in correcting the precedents set by Peter Jackson's non-diverse cast. I think you mean, Dan, precedent, not president. That is stupid. You're supposed to be a writer. That is just dumb. That is a dumb mistake, because that's not even a misspelling. You're just using the wrong fucking word. And I'm supposed to take anything you have to say about Tolkien seriously? And Peter Jackson's non-diverse cast, guess what? Middle-earth was written by a white man for white people, based on white mythology and white cultures around him. I'm sorry if that offends people, and I'm sorry if that makes people uncomfortable, but that's the fucking truth, okay? So it doesn't need a diverse cast. Making the cast of Middle-earth diverse, wouldn't that count as cultural appropriation? Since the intent of the author was to give a very specific people, i.e. the British people, the native British people, a prehistoric mythology. So wouldn't trying to change that to meet modern day standards be the very definition of cultural appropriation? Because you're taking something that was designed to be a mythology for a very specific group of people, and you're actively changing it to no longer be for those people. Interesting. Just a thought. Staying true to the books and introducing the series to a much wider audience. And again, there you have it. That's how they view that's how the mainstream views Tolkien. Something to be used, okay, and they want to correct the precedents that were set by Peter Jackson not having enough brown people in his movies, okay? They claim to stay true to the books, but you can't have more diverse cast and stay true to the books. Tolkien's very specific in what the characters look like. Okay? And the key part here is introducing the series to a much wider audience, because ultimately that's all they care about. They care about getting as much eyes on the screen as possible because it makes them money. They don't care about Tolkien. They don't care about doing justice in adapting his stuff, okay? Instead, by keeping to a more traditionalist approach, they missed a considerable opportunity. And there you go. That's exactly how they view Tolkien and the ability to make the Rings of Pewter. An opportunity to rewrite things in the way they want it. Again, Payne and Decay said they're writing the book Tolkien never wrote. Okay? And this is why. Because to them, it's an opportunity to push an ideology, to push belief systems, okay, that they want. Which, ironically, the very nature of doing that is something Tolkien was opposed to. Hence his whole famous thing about how he hates allegory and prefers applicability. And for those people who say, well, you can apply it to today's standards. And said, no, what Tolkien was referring to when he said that, just a little sidetrack here. What Tolkien was referring to when he said that, the difference between allegory and applicability, he actually says, most people don't know the rest of the quote from that letter, but what he says, he actually lays out the difference between the two. And ultimately it comes down to this. Tolkien did not like allegory because he felt that allegory was the author, the creator of the work, telling the reader, this means that. Sauron equals Hitler, right? That's what he was opposed to. He did not like that concept of the author telling the reader, this is the conclusion, these are the connections you have to draw with the real world, right? This character in my book is equal to this character in real life. He did not like that. What he chose was applicability. And he describes applicability as the reader reading about Sauron and deciding for themselves if Sauron is similar to Hitler, say in the 1940s, or Khrushchev in the 1960s, right? Or maybe Sauron is more like Putin, okay, in the 2020s, okay? But that's applicability. That's the reader making the connection of their own volition, not the author telling you that this equals that. That's allegory. And that's the difference. And that's why Tolkien did not like allegory and he preferred applicability. A good example of this is in the Rings of Pewter. The whole thing with how they changed the Numenorians, that whole scene, for those of you who, the brave souls that sat through that show like I did, there's a scene in Numenor where, the Numenorian citizens are like, yeah, we hate the elves because they done took our jobs and now they got one of them blonde-haired elfin people here. And before you know it, they're all going to come here and they're all going to take our jobs. It was basically an allegory for the modern discussion on immigration here in the United States. That's what it was meant to, to show that sort of isolationist perspective that, according to Hollywood, some portions of Middle America have, right? Because Middle America is not like, hey, everybody can come in. We don't care. We shouldn't even have borders. And so Hollywood says, well, that means that you're xenophobic and you're against immigration. And so they put that in there to be specifically allegorical to something going on in the real world. Like whether you liked it or not, you couldn't help but draw the connection there. And that's exactly what Tolkien did not want his work to be used for. He did not want it to do that. He wanted it to be applicable to the reader, how the reader saw fit. Okay? And that's what Peter Jackson, in his quote-unquote non-diverse cast, was trying to do. They were trying to put Tolkien, Peter Jackson says it, we were trying to put Tolkien's messages in the movie, not ours. Okay? And that's why to this day, 20 years later, people still love those films and they're held up as probably one of the best trilogies in Hollywood history, right? One of the most beloved film adaptations of a novel or series of novels ever. Because Tolkien's ideas were put at the forefront. Not Peter Jackson's, not Fran Walsh's, not Philippa Boyan's. And so I think, Dan, you're completely missing the point here, and I think you're letting your politics get in the way of your objective viewing of Tolkien and his writing and what it means to have a show like The Rings of Pewter. I would dare say that The Rings of Pewter isn't traditionalist. I would argue that it is holding up to modern progressive ideals, and it does totally take a shit on Tolkien's lore and Tolkien's ideas and Tolkien's works in order to push modern Hollywood agendas. And that's just my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. And if people don't like it, I don't really care. That's just how I see it. Okay? Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and that includes me. All right, folks, so let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Do you think that Dan has a point and that The Rings of Pewter isn't going far enough to be progressive and stuff like that? I also think he more completely off the mark with the whole androgyny thing with the elves and stuff and the dwarves. The dwarves, you could make the case because it is written in there that dwarven women look exactly like dwarven men, insofar as that like non-dwarves may not be able to even tell them apart without, at a distance, and when at a distance meaning like 5 feet. So in that sense, I guess in that sort of definition of the word androgynous, you could make the argument that the dwarves might be a little androgynous on the more masculine side, per se. But in terms of the elves being androgynous, no. The elves are not ever described as sort of being, these asexual beings that, you can't tell the men from the women and stuff like that. Tolkien's very specific, okay? And I would actually point you, Dan, to a book that I have sitting behind me, Dan Bentley, and it's called The Nature of Middle-earth. And it literally focuses on these types of questions, okay? And they lay it out all based on Tolkien's writings as well as his notes and unpublished stuff up until that book came out. And no, the elves were never going to be androgynous in the way that you're using the word, i.e. where you couldn't tell an elf male from an elf female. No, they were they were in your classic male and female roles. And when I say physically, they presented as classically male and classically female, okay? They were all slender and had the long hair and stuff like that. The way you see them depicted in Peter Jackson's books. I mean, in Peter Jackson's films. Okay, but there was no mistake in an elven woman and an elven man. You knew which one was the man and you knew which one was the woman just on sight. Okay, that is given. Again, some other things they do, Tolkien did say that, in terms of their culture, they didn't have the standard male and female cultural roles that we adhere to in the modern, real world and stuff like that, i.e. men could be just as happy cooking dinner as the women in terms of the elves. So they didn't have gender roles, but they definitely had genders, and they definitely were not as androgynous as you're trying to say that Tolkien describes them as. 100% wrong on that one. Anyway, that's all I got right now for this one, folks. I think that's going to do it for today. That will be today's third video. So, as always, remember, if you like the video, like the video. If you want to share the video, by all means do so. It gets it out there. It gets it seen. It helps us with the YouTube algorithm. If you have not subscribed, I would hope that you would consider subscribing and turning that red button gray and joining the army of beautiful badasses, because, we have cake. And if you are a returning subscriber, I thank you, as always, from the bottom of my heart. You guys and gals make this worthwhile as we draw a line in the sand and hold firm, protecting the professor, his works, and everything fantasy and high fantasy and within the genre. And just coming together as a fandom, and not letting these big corporations just run roughshod over the things that we grew up loving. Right? Like they're trying to do. So anyway, that's going to do it. I will see you guys on the next one. Remember to be good, be awesome, be safe, but more importantly, stay more dorkish. Peace.